Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. The Clemson Tigers continue the momentum on the recruiting trail in the 2025 class, landing four-star tight end Logan Brooking from the state of Georgia. This is a really exciting get for Clemson. I mean, as a Michigan fan, I had my eyes on Logan Brooking, 6'4", 220 pounds. Plays both ways. Actually registered 12 sacks as a sophomore in high school, 25 catches for 373 yards. Another big body tight end, kind of like what you've been seeing from Jake Bringenstool to work the seams. Really nice get for the Clemson Tigers. Want to talk about Logan Brooking a little, but also want to get into Dabo Swinney in the future of the Clemson Tigers. We have some takes on it that are kind of Dabo fans in a sense. Really excited to get into it. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys. The amount of support, and especially from the Clemson fans, we've talked a ton about this program. You guys have shown a ton of support to the boys. So if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. But more importantly for this, I would love to hear from your guys' perspective what the vibes are around this Clemson program and Dabo Swinney into the rest of the 2023 year and into 2024. Dill, gonna kick this one off to you. We've had a lot of conversations, not with the camera in front of us. How are you feeling about Dabo Swinney and the Clemson Tigers heading into the offseason here?
I mean, honestly, I think you can boil a lot of their problems down to, frankly, missing on two quarterbacks, it feels like. And I'm not sure I'm ready to be totally out on Cade Klubnik, but right now I don't think he's totally acquitting himself as a guy who you're very confident is going to go lead you to those
Yes.
guys that you had with Lawrence and Boyd and Watson and those real stars who kind of came through this program. And when you have players at that position who are that good, it shields, it hides pretty much everything else you have going on.
Yeah, I get the record 4-4. Like Clemson Tiger fans, you're just not used to seeing that record. But you look at the product on the field, you look at some of the efficiency metrics, and I'm not a big nerd when it comes to numbers. This is a Clemson team that should have won at least 3 of those games. You look back at the NC State game, outgained NC State 2-1 in yards. Miami, you outgained them more than 2-1 in yards. You look at that Duke game, obviously the turnovers in the red zone and one big play against Florida State. Like this is a team that the record could be so much different if just 4 or 5 plays went the Clemson Tigers' way. And you're looking at maybe 7-1 year where not many people are batting an eye about the success you've had. Dill, does Dabo Swinney need to change a few things about how this program is run to ensure success in the future? I totally agree. But to be like completely out on a coach that has been a top 3 coach in college football for the last decade, to me, I just don't get it.
But I also think like you got to put that in context. A lot of coaches have had to go through those transitions. I mean, you look at what Nick Saban was doing as his kind of defense first era was fading out, and you didn't have scores like 14-10 in a national championship game just because the other teams around the country were starting to modernize their offense and go to the spread. You saw Nick Saban go get a guy like Lane Kiffin and change what he was going to do. And yeah, he had to deal with some growing pains where he wanted to kind of keep it on the ground, play a little heavy. That just wasn't how it was going to work. So it's not, I think the people who are going to like jump on Dabo right now and say, oh, you definitely need to use the portal or definitely need to do X. I mean, what he's done has worked for so long. I do think he's got to make some changes. I think they really should probably be going to the portal to an extent. But I think looking at this program like, well, the whole thing's dead, I think is crazy.
It's to me, it's ludicrous. And let's talk about the transfer portal because I also agree. Dabo Swinney, for so long, the transfer portal was kind of full of guys who kind of burn out at their old schools. The talent in the pool of talent in the transfer portal wasn't that great. So teams that use the transfer portal, maybe you could get marginally better. But if you recruited really well and developed really well, which Clemson is phenomenal at doing, you didn't really need to go into the transfer portal. Nowadays, though, the transfer portal is so loaded with talent and represents such an opportunity to fill holes in your roster. To me, and I get Dabo Swinney, it's what he's done has worked for a full decade and a half, a decade plus at Clemson. I get change is hard, but you look at, I mean, to make an analogy, like businesses, like when the world changes, you got to change with the world sometimes. And I think the transfer portal is something where Dabo Swinney, I get you don't want to. That's not been what you built this program on, but the world of college football is changing. And I think Dabo Swinney at least needs to embrace some of that change because you look, Alabama, Nick Saban, Kirby Smart in Georgia, they didn't use the transfer portal a ton in years past, but they're starting to now because they realize how much better they can make a team just adding a few guys in the transfer portal
Well,
supplement.
and I think, frankly, for what Dabo, it always feels like his concern is disrupting the culture. And on top of not having a ton of skill in the transfer portal a couple years ago, I think you did have a lot of like more malcontents who
100%.
just didn't crack it at their school and were upset. They didn't think they were playing where they should. That's just not the case anymore. You look at like offensive linemen coming out of Stanford, like, yeah, David Shaw got fired. Those weren't malcontents. Those weren't guys who hated that school or had issues with the coaches. They just, they saw an opportunity. Man, if I go to Oklahoma or Michigan, I can play out my last year as a stud. I can fill in a hole in that squad. But the reason they were in the portal wasn't for like, quote, the wrong reason, which I think, in fairness to Dabo, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, they were probably more prevalent cases of guys in the portal for, quote, the wrong reasons.
And it's like when we get out of talk about the transfer portal, it's not like you have to be Ole Miss and go grab 25 transfers a cycle, but you look at a few spots on this roster, the wide receiver position being an obvious one, the offensive line being an obvious one, where if you just add a Keon Coleman that Florida State added, or you add a Ladarius Henderson that Michigan added to the offensive line, just like one or two bodies that were guys that maybe graduated at their old school or trying to make a jump to the Power 5 level, whatever it might be, you make a really good point. The guys in the transfer portal, the last couple cycles, specifically last cycle, weren't a bunch of guys that get kicked off their team or got suspended from their team and had to hit the transfer portal. It was guys that were really good football players that had good relationships at their past schools and just, hey, I want to graduate and go play for a national title. In Clemson, the beauty for Clemson is you're offering them a opportunity to go compete for an ACC title, compete for a national title, where a guy at Stanford who was an all Pac-12 guy didn't have that opportunity. Clemson, to me, I feel like it's almost obvious at this point that if you and you look at Clemson's year this year, if you just added a few transfers, like you put up Keon Coleman on this Clemson roster, I don't think they're 4-4, and that's just one player.
Yeah, and then not to mention this school is still a school that's recruiting fairly well out of the high school ranks.
Oh, yeah.
That maybe to an extent this year it's not going to be that prototypical like top 3 year or something, but it's still going to have some really strong guys led by Brown and Wesco who again, all schools wanted, and they're coming to Clemson. I don't think that's going to change. I think, again, he's going to be able to hit the high school ranks. He's shown that. I just agree. I think like some minor tweaks in this program, it shouldn't be as disruptive as I think he feels like it's going to be, and I don't even know if there is some level of arrogance, like, well, I'm going to do it my way, I don't care. That's probably where you get into a real problem.
Yes.
I don't necessarily see that right now. I think in his heart, he believes that, well, we've built this culture. This is a culture-driven football program. And if I start bringing in guys here and there, it disrupts that. I don't see that. I think you look across the country, there's a lot of schools with really, really good cultures. Michigan, Georgia, Oklahoma now is coming.
And can you blame him? Like, can you blame him for saying what we've done at Clemson has, like, when he ripped into that fan? Like, I get his frustration. What he's done at Clemson has worked. And so it's hard to go away from something that's worked so successfully. This year might be a year where it kind of opens his eyes a little bit and says, hey, we maybe need to continue to get with the times of college football. College football is changing. You got to change with it if you want to maintain that success. Nick Saban's gone through it, like you mentioned. The second part I'm thinking about, from a culture standpoint, that's his big thing is we build this program on getting guys out of high school, establishing that culture, getting those guys developed. We don't want to mess with that. If you have such a strong culture, adding 1, 2, 3, or 4 guys in the transfer portal, is that really going to disrupt the culture that much? If you have such a strong culture, adding 4 guys shouldn't, if it's that strong, impact the culture like he's saying it is.
Especially if they were rocks at their old school. And again, there's a lot of guys in the transfer portal who were stud. They were, again, guys who know how to be part of a team and play at a really high level. I don't see this as like, it just isn't the same portal as it used to be. It's so different. I don't think comparing it even to 3 years ago makes any sense. So I think so. That feels like the one thing he's got to do. But the end of the day, I don't really see this program as being that far away. Again, I think they've missed on 2
it's
quarterbacks.
not that far away. Like, that's the crazy part is it's a 4-4 record, and I get that's what matters. At the end of the day, you get evaluated on what your win-loss record is, but you look at those games. I mean, all 4 of those losses, you take tour plays, change those results of those plays, they're sitting at 8-0. Like, that's how good this Clemson team is. It's still a power ranked team that I think is a top 20 team in the whole entire country. The record just doesn't display it because 1, 2, or 3 plays. And again, you add 1, 2, or 3 players, and those plays might have changed a little bit. So I look at this, and I almost think that the 4-4 record, this I wonder if Clemson fans agree or not, is almost a good thing. Like, it kind of has opened his eyes. Say you go 10-2 again, and you say, hey, we're working is working, and we're not going to go to the transfer portal again. Now it's, hey, we maybe need to make a change because we're sitting at 4-4, and that's unacceptable for a Clemson Tiger program.
And there's one thing you don't doubt about Dabo, and that's competitive spirit. I mean, the guy still he feels like he's equally as into it. When they lose, he gets equally as fired up.
Hey,
he
gets
equally as fired up. So I don't feel like that's been lost like maybe it was for Mac Brown at Texas when he kind of overstayed his welcome, and maybe it just started to, like, the passion kind of got lost in what they were doing. I don't get that sense at all at Clemson. It probably is just a few tweaks, and frankly, to me, more important than the tweaks, it's hitting on a quarterback again, like they had a couple.
Totally agree with it. It does not seem like you've seen coaches who had, like Kirk Ferentz at Iowa, like a ton of success. That era feels stale. It doesn't feel stale at Clemson. Like, you look, they're still bringing in really good recruiting classes. There's still a lot of buzz. You take a poll of those guys in the locker room, they're fired up to be there. Nothing feels stale about this program. It just feels like they need to adapt to how college football is changing. Again, that's kind of my thoughts. I'm happy Logan Brooking committed, giving us a chance to kind of talk about where Clemson is going as a program. Clemson fans would love to hear from you guys.
He also just, like, straight up exemplifies the fact that, like, guys still want to play at this school. It's 100%. Not the allure of Clemson, I don't think, is in any way gone. I think you still see, especially on the defensive end, if you go there, you're going to get developed into a top tier kid.
Look at TJ Parker, Peter Woods playing like some of the best true freshmen in all of America. It's still there. It's a disappointing year, but I think this program is going to be just fine. Dabo Swinney is going to be just fine. I just think, like you said, a couple tweaks, maybe a couple bodies in the transfer portal. Again, this team is it legitimately could arguably be a player away from being an 8-0 team right now. So that's our takes on Clemson. We've talked about it a ton. We just would love to hear from you guys again. It's kind of an intriguing conversation. We'll chop it up in the comments section again. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to you guys later. Peace.